Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says it is a tragedy for India and its neighbors that the country has been taken over by the extremist ideology. In an interview, Khan questioned the world's silence over India's actions in occupied Kashmir, which is under curfew since August last year. He said the international media didn't give adequate coverage to the Kashmir tragedy. The Prime Minister also said India's new Citizenship Act is discriminatory against Muslims. Meanwhile, Khan also chaired a high-level meeting to review the human rights situation in the occupied valley. Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa also attended the meeting. It called for the immediate end to the lockdown and the communications blackout in the valley. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the Taliban have shown a willingness to reduce violence in Afghanistan. In a statement, Qureshi said it is a step towards a peace agreement between the Taliban and the US. The Foreign Minister said Pakistan wants the dialogue to be result-oriented and welcomes all peace initiatives. He said Pakistan has played its role effectively for peace and stability in Afghanistan. The Foreign Minister said regional stability is essential for both Pakistan and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko, says US officials routinely lied over progress in Afghanistan. Sopko was summoned by the US Congress to testify on the Washington Post's recent release of previously classified Afghanistan papers. In his statement, he said right from its start, the entire operation in Afghanistan reeked of arrogance and deceit. He said the US sent personnel into Afghanistan who did not know the difference between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Sopko also said abuses committed by coalition-aligned warlords drove many Afghans into the Taliban's arms. Meanwhile, in India, as many as 14 states have refused to implement BJP government's controversial Citizenship Act. The law, widely perceived as racist, has triggered countrywide mass protests and clashes costing 27 lives since it was passed in December. The states against the anti-Muslim law include Punjab, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. State governments have declared the law divisive and in violation of India's constitution and basic human rights. Meanwhile, the Jamia Millia University has moved the court against the Delhi police for their 15th December action in the campus. Violence broke out after police tortured students for protesting against the new act. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said dialogue with the world powers is possible despite tensions with the US. In a televised speech, Rouhani said Tehran is working to prevent any military confrontation. He also said US President Donald Trump's behavior is unpredictable. Tensions in the Middle East increased after the killing of Iran's top commander in Baghdad last week. Iran retaliated by targeting bases housing US troops in Iraq. This follows calls from the world leaders to reduce tensions in the region. In Syria, 17 government soldiers and 22 rebels have been killed in fresh clashes in Idlib. The latest violence buries a last week ceasefire deal announced by Russia and Turkey that never took hold. Yesterday, 21 civilians were killed when government warplanes hit a vegetable market in Idlib. The region is the last stronghold of rebels fighting the government forces since 2015. A UN report says around 350,000 Syrians have been displaced by a renewed Russian-backed offensive in Idlib province. The displaced included mostly women and children who sought shelter in border areas near Turkey. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas says Libya's Khalifa Haftar is committed to a ceasefire in North African country. Maas said Haftar is also willing to participate in Berlin conference on the conflict in Libya this Sunday. This German Foreign Ministry tweeted this after the ministers' meeting in Libya. Earlier, Libya's Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj said he would also attend the meeting in Berlin. Germany has invited leaders from 11 countries for talks to end the conflict in Libya. The country has been plagued by civil war since the ouster of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. In Yemen, southern separatist leader Idris al-Zubaydi has warned against the looming collapse of a power-sharing deal. The separatist chief said the region is threatened by the twin threats of economic catastrophe and militant attacks. The agreement to resolve the battle for dominance in the south between the Yemeni government and the Southern Transitional Council was signed in Riyadh last November. It was hailed as a step towards ending the wider conflict in Yemen that pits the government against the Houthi rebels. In an interview, Zubaydi said he was committed to the deal under the leadership of Saudi Arabia, which leads a military coalition against the Houthis.
The delay in implementing the Riyadh Agreement comes from a defective part in the government, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, meaning Al-Islah Party, under the umbrella of the legitimate government.
In Russia, lawmakers have approved Mikhail Mishustin as the new prime minister after President Vladimir Putin nominated him for the role. 383 lawmakers voted in favor of Mishustin, while 41 abstained. No one voted against him. Earlier, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev's government resigned to give Putin room to carry out changes in the constitution. Putin's fourth term in office is due to end in 2024. And under the existing constitution, he would not be entitled to another term. In northern Iraq, 3 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants have been killed in Turkish airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation. In a statement, Turkey's National Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Kirkuk region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in terror campaign spanning 30 years. To ease the trade war that has rattled the world economy for nearly 2 years, the US and China have signed a Phase 1 trade agreement. The deal was signed by US President Donald Trump and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He at a White House ceremony. Under the agreement, China will strengthen intellectual property rules and boost imports of the US goods by $200 billion over 2 years. President Trump said both the countries are correcting the wrongs of the past and delivering a future of economic justice and security. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He said the agreement is rooted in equality and mutual respect before defending his country's economic model.
This is mutually beneficial and a win-win agreement. It will stabilize global economic development, promote world peace and prosperity. And it is in the interest of the producers, consumers, and investors in both countries. At the same time, this agreement is not directed at or will affect the lawful rights and interest of any third country. It is in line with the rules of the World Trade Organization.
For more on this, we are joined by Einar Tengen, China-based political and economic affairs analyst. Thank you for joining us. With the US and China signing the deal, how far can the rest of the world take this as a sign that the global economy will return to normal?
No, if there's an old normal, the new normal will probably involve quite a bit of distrust between these two powers. This is more of a truce. If you read through the 92-plus page document, you'll see that it's more like a memorandum of understanding. There are some big numbers that I think Donald Trump wanted for his political side. And there's this snapback agreement, which is kind of a buzzword that the U.S. has some sort of retaliation. But in terms of China, they could walk away from the deal entirely, and then we're back to square one. So a lot remains to be seen how it's implemented, and if, in fact, these two want to cooperate with each other. You'll note that Donald Trump only talked about the U.S., whereas the Chinese side was more talking about the global situation and how that would affect everybody involved.
Mr. Tengen, with China agreeing to purchase $200 billion of U.S. goods and strengthen its intellectual property rules, how fair is it to say that the U.S. has won the trade war?
Well, the intellectual property rules have actually been being strengthened. In fact, there is nothing actually in the new document which hasn't already been implemented. People can say that that was in anticipation of this agreement, but the fact is that China has been making great strides. Remember, China is now the largest filer of intellectual property rights in the world. They now have skin in the game. This was not true in 2001, and they're very interested in protecting the rights. So I think that solves itself. In terms of the big numbers, we'll have yet to see. Remember, for example, in agriculture, in 2017, which was the height of the agricultural trade between China and U.S., China only imported 24 billion. It's hard to see how you could get 40 billion because of capacity issues. Remember, farmers cut back on the amount they're growing over the uncertainty. So there's not a lot of excess capacity where they could ship that to China. So it remains to be seen how that will work out.
Mr. Tandon, what Beijing has gained through this deal?
Yes, I think they have. They've gained time. They're trying to steady the ship. Remember, we are on the cusp of a recession. Whether it's this year or next year, it's pretty clear that there's going to be some sort of economic realignment. I think China wants to get its ducks in a row, and it would like to see both regionally and globally a much stronger trade system, something more going back to the norms of the WTO than this kind of law of the jungle of me first.
Thank you very much, Mr. N.R. Tandon, China-based analyst, for joining us. Now, moving on, experts from leading international financial institutions have welcomed the Phase 1 trade agreement between the U.S. and China, calling the deal a much-needed step. They say it will benefit the two countries and galvanize the global economy. The details in this report.
After almost 2 years of trade war that slowed global growth, the world's two biggest economies have made a truce. Bruce Kasman, chief economist of JP Morgan, believes the preliminary trade pact will end market uncertainty.
And I think that will be a plus for business sentiment. It will be a plus for global growth as we look into 2020, as we take away one of the more significant concerns and risks.
Under the agreement, China has pledged to boost US imports by $200 billion over 2 years and strengthen its intellectual property rules. Acclaimed US economist and author David Goldman said the new deal will help the American manufacturing sector.
I think the uncertainty will decrease and we'll have a return to some improvement in capital investment, so a moderate recovery in industrial production in the United States, probably some significant improvement in countries that are oriented towards capital goods exports, like, for example, Germany, Japan, and South Korea.
The US and China have now opened negotiations on a Phase 2 trade deal, looking for a complete waiver of tariffs on Chinese goods and other issues.
South Korea says 2 ships with a Korean crew have been detained by Indonesia and accused of violating its territorial waters. The foreign ministry said a Panama-flagged LPG carrier has been held for over 3 months while a South Korean cargo ship was stopped last Thursday. The ministry said 9 South Koreans, including the captain and 8 Indonesian sailors, were on board one of the vessels. It said the second ship carried 4 South Koreans and 19 Indonesians. The South Korean government is working to secure the sailors' release. Welcome back. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland will never return post-Brexit. Von der Leyen said the European Union withdrawal agreement assures the current border status will stay intact. She said the EU is ready to invest in the implementation of the withdrawal protocol as it will ensure its full execution. She said the Brexit debate magnified Ireland's national sovereignty. Leanne said Ireland is a strong and confident country with the fastest growing economy in the European bloc. In France, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Paris and Nantes on the 43rd day of the demonstrations against proposed pension reforms. Trade unions blocked ports and disrupted power production, pressurizing President Emmanuel Macron to scrap a pension overhaul. The electricity output was down to 9%, while ferry services to Britain suffered delays. Students, teachers, lawyers and workers from other sectors have also joined the strike. Macron's government wants to end privileges for some professions and provide incentives for the people who work longer. Despite the prolonged strikes, government has shown no sign of bowing down to the demands of trade unions. The UN is warning of higher temperatures and extreme weather in 2020, declaring the past decade the hottest on record. The World Meteorological Organization says the dire consequences of increasing global temperatures are already visible. The WMO pointed to retreating ice, record sea levels, increasing ocean heat and acidification. It said the year 2019 is the second hottest on record after 2016. The UN agency says since the 1980s, each decade has been warmer than the one before, warning the trend is expected to continue. Rainfall across parts of eastern Australia have provided some relief after months of catastrophic fires fueled by climate change. But the air quality in the parts of the country has become the worst on the planet. This report has the details.
Australia's Weather Bureau says the country will have to wait until March for heavy rains. The blazes have claimed 29 lives and killed over 1 billion animals. More than 2,000 homes have been destroyed. Some 100 fires are still burning across the east coast. Meanwhile, British tennis player Liam Brodie has criticised Australian Open officials for holding the qualifying round this week, despite the toxic smoke. Earlier, Slovenian Dalila Jokopovic was forced to retire while leading in her match when she was overcome by a coughing fit.
Yeah, I have no asthma or breathing problems. I never experienced something like this like I had yesterday. I mean, it was really scary. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. I had the feeling like I'm going to collapse on the court, and I was really scared, I have to say. And the whole match was tough for me to breathe, to get some fresh air, to get some air at all. So yeah, was tough conditions, very.
Japan's defense ministry says it has sent 2 transport planes and 70 personnel to join efforts to fight the devastating bushfires.
Welcome back. In Peru, a once bustling railway station now serves as a library, museum and a concert center called the House of Literature. It is one of the favorite places of the book lovers. More details in this report.
This former train station is one of Peru's biggest cultural centers. Built in 1912, the station was formally inaugurated as the House of Literature in 2009. Once abandoned, it is now visited by thousands of people every day.
The House of Literature is a space for people to encourage themselves to read and to learn. No, it doesn't exist. I don't know any other places like this. Not at all. This place is quite innovative. In fact, in Chile, there aren't places like this that are so iconic.
One of the star programs involves grandparents telling stories to youngsters. Its objective is to promote reading and literature in children through oral narration. The director of the House of Peruvian Literature says that it is a public cultural center of permanent dialogues.
How can we make an impact on a national level with the precariousness and fragility of our cultural institutions? You can't find cultural centers or art galleries or even museums properly implemented in all of the country's cities.
Milagros Adariaga adds that despite the rapid growth of digital culture, written culture continues to generate curiosity and debates.
I believe that it is a question of investigating. I do not believe that social networks are distancing us from the written word. They might be distancing us from the forms of narration that were consolidated and that are going to perhaps be used less due to the appearance of new forms.
The facade of railway stations has a large iron gate where the letters F and C stand out, revealing its former use as a central railway station. The transformed cultural center has hosted art exhibitions, seminars, and reading circles for youth literature and debates.
Brazil has opened a new $100 million Antarctic base built by China's China National Electronics Import and Export Corporation. Brazil's Vice President Hamilton Mourão inaugurated the Comandante Ferraz base today.
The new facility replaces a research station destroyed in an explosion almost 7 years ago. Brazil's 1982 Antarctic program was set back in 2012 when an explosion killed 2 officers and destroyed 70% of the building. Brazil's Science and Technology Minister Marcos Pontes says that new 4,500 square meter facility was bigger and safer.
It's great to see the capacity that we will have in scientific terms, because this will also signify the work of hundreds of researchers in Brazil and from other places on account of our cooperation, so that we can cooperate on the advancement of science and the knowledge of the planet as one.
The base can house 65 people and will be used to study microbiology, glaciers, and climate, amongst other fields.
Brazil's indigenous tribes have joined forces to protect the environment and native land rights. The tribes say far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's policies are destroying the Amazon forest. Nearly 450 members of the 47 tribes have met at a village on the Xingu River to discuss their plan of action. Bolsonaro previously said he wants to open up the Amazon to commercial mining and agriculture to lift indigenous people out of poverty. Quiapao Chief Raoni rejected the prospect of mining on tribal lands and called on Brazil's Congress to block the measures. The coordinator of Brazil's Association of Indigenous Peoples, Sonia Guajajara, called it a grave moment in history.
We are going through a very grave moment in our history. It looks like a war scenario. The criminalization of our leaders, the assassination of indigenous people, the increasing rate of violence due to land conflicts, illegal logging, illegal mining. They are there as if it were nothing.
The Wall Street stocks have risen after the US and China signed the phase 1 of their trade deal. The indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite are trading near 1% higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index landed in high territory. Shares of semiconductor stocks are also streaming upwards. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.